The judge sentenced the man to death until a dog walked into the room with evidence that changed everything. He knew that no one believed him. Not the prosecutor, not the juror, not even the man who had been sharing his cell with him for the last weeks. He knew and still hoped. For what? For a miracle? For the truth? No, he hoped for only one thing, that Rusty would understand. Michael Carter. Stand up. The courtroom froze. The dull hum of the air conditioners, the coughing of an old reporter in the gallery, and the blinkers of a pen in the minutes. All this was much louder than the words of the judge. Michael rose slowly, as if he knew that this was the last time he would be asked to rise, not to be taken away forever. The court has found you guilty of the rape and murder of Sophia Rendell. The verdict is death penalty. There was not a cry or groan in the courtroom, only someone clicked a pen. Everything had been decided in advance. He did not flinch, only his gaze slid from side to side. Somewhere there, in the corridor behind the concrete wall, an old German shepherd named Rusty was waiting for him. He sat in a carrier, as always, calm, as if he understood everything at first sight. He loved Sophia. She was, perhaps, the only woman who could make him keep quiet and not get angry. They met after he left the police, and in a couple of months she managed to enter his life as if she had always lived there. And then she was found dead. The apartment was covered in blood. The door had not been broken down. There was evidence of a struggle. The prints of his boots on the bottle neck were stained with blood. DNA was on her body. It all matched. He said, "I was set up. They didn't care." "Do you have a last word?" the judge asked. Michael didn't answer right away. He looked at the prosecutor, at the jury, at the empty bench where Sophia's mother had sat. "Yes," he said finally. "When this is over, I want to be allowed to see my dog Rusty." The judge frowned. "Is that your last wish?" "Yes." The judge nodded, not understanding why a man doomed to death would want to see a dog. The record read, "Last wish, to meet his dog Rusty." Michael was led out of the courtroom. He walked calmly, as he once walked to the interrogation room, as he walked to the manhunt. Only then he had a holster, a radio, and an ID on his belt. Now he had only handcuffs and the numbers on the back of his overalls. He saw her mother behind the glass. She was looking straight at the sky, tired, without tears, but with hatred. He did not lower his look, because he himself had already ceased to understand why he was still looking at this world. When he was locked up in solitary confinement, for the first time he allowed himself to lie down not on a bunk, but right on the concrete floor. No pain, just silence and cold. Sometimes the prison doctor came with pills, and the chaplain offered confession. Michael was silent. There was no one to talk to. 3 days passed. On the 4th, a guard came to him, with a gloomy face. "Your dog is here." Michael sat down. "Where?" "Over there in the backyard." They brought him. They gave him 20 minutes. He stood up and walked without words, without resistance. They led him into a fenced-in area where they usually walk service dogs. Rusty was sitting there by the net. The dog did not move from his place until Michael came closer. Then he got up, and as if there had been no 2 weeks of separation, slowly approached and put his muzzle on his lap. Michael sat down next to him, put his hands on his warm forehead, felt the fur, the same one that he combed in the evenings in front of the TV when he was still a man with a future. "Forgive me," he said quietly. He did not protect her. He could not. Rusty barked quietly. It was the sound he usually made when he felt anxious. Michael understood. The dog knew and felt something. They were wrong. "Rusty, I didn't kill her." The dog raised its head. Its ears stood up, its eyes strained, and a second later Rusty jumped up, turned to the fence and froze. Something caught his attention behind the net. Far away in the bushes, a person or an animal flashed. A shadow. Rusty growled. "Hey!" Michael shouted. But the guard was already walking toward him. "That's it, time is up." "Wait. Okay, Carter, let's go." Rusty didn't move. He stood by the fence and looked toward the forest. Then he suddenly rushed up and disappeared into the shadows. He crawled under the net, as if he knew he had to go. The guard swore. "Damn, he ran away." Michael smiled for the first time in weeks. Let him go. That same evening, a short story appeared on the news. Former Detective Michael Carter accused of the murder of a girl, was sentenced to death. The trial was declared closed. The sentence will be carried out within a month. The TV was turned off. Michael was left in silence again. But somewhere there, beyond the walls, in the deep forest, ran a dog who did not care about the essence, politics, and headlines. He knew only one thing. His master was innocent, and he would prove it. The prison regime did not tolerate changes. Every day was similar to the previous one, like 2 drops of muddy water. Only one thing stood out from this viscous routine: Rusty's disappearance. The guards, having laughed at the great errand, decided that the dog would either die in the forest or be shot by hunters. Michael did not try to convince them. He simply remained silent. Now he had something that they could not take away. The feeling that somewhere out there, in freedom, some other game had begun for the sky. 3 days passed. On the 4th day, a man from Internal Affairs, Lieutenant Colonel Green, knocked on the warden's office. He was the type who never shook hands, so as not to leave a trace, as they called at the department. "You've had a strange episode here," he said. "This dog, do you have any footage of him leaving?" "Yes. The cameras in the backyard caught it all. I need to look at it." The warden shrugged. Half an hour later, they were sitting in the observation room. On the screen, a black and white image. Michael was sitting next to Rusty. Then the dog suddenly jumped up and disappeared. A second later, something flickered in the far corner of the screen. A person, a shadow, unwound, but someone was there. Green rewound. "See." The warden frowned. "Yeah, he's not a prisoner and not our man, I think." Green tapped his finger on the monitor. "You do realize that if Carter is innocent, it could cost us our heads?" The evidence was ironclad. "I know, but still." Meanwhile, in the forest, Rusty moved by instinct. He followed the scent, the subtle marks that were preserved in his memory. He had been in this forest before. Sophia, Michael, and he had walked here 3 months ago on a hot August day. Everything had been simple then. Laughter, a thermos of coffee, deer flickering between the trees. He found an old campsite, trampled earth, burnt stones, the remains of a tent, the smell of burning and blood. He buried his nose in the ground, dug with his paws. A few minutes later, a click, something hard, a piece of plastic, a box. He grabbed her and carried her. He didn't know where. He just ran through the woods, through the swamp, along the road, until he came to a dirt road. Jack Pearson, a hunter, was driving home in his rusty pickup truck when a dog jumped out onto the road in front of him. The brakes squealed. Jack jumped out with a shotgun, but the dog didn't attack. He walked over and put a strange plastic box right at the man's feet. "Shit. Who do we think you are?" There was a camera logo on the plastic, a memory card. Jack took it, put it in his pocket, and put the dog in the back. "Okay, bum, let's see what you've got here." A few hours later, he inserted the card into his laptop. The screen flickered. The folder was called Night 1208. The first file was a dark, shaking image. Someone, apparently, didn't notice that the camera was still recording. Then noise, footsteps, a voice. "Faster. You're an idiot. You left your gloves. Run. She's unconscious." The camera tilts. Silhouettes, faces, biker vests. One had a tattoo of a skull with rabbits. Jack squinted. He knew that tattoo. It wasn't an accident. He knew who it was. The next morning, he went to the station and asked to speak to a detective. The police had the card. Meanwhile, in his prison cell, Michael heard the lock click out of schedule. He was led into the interrogation room. A man with a laptop and a folder, Lieutenant Colonel Green, was sitting at the table. "Michael, we've got new material, a video." He pressed play. Michael froze. He knew the man with the tattoo. The name popped up on its own. Blake Harris. One of those whom he once tried to steal. One of those who swore that everything would still happen. Michael looked up at Green. "This video will give me a chance." Green nodded silently. "If the DNA confirms, and the court accepts the evidence, you will walk out of here." Michael took a quiet, joyless breath. He knew the case had just begun. Lieutenant Colonel Green looked at Michael with an expression that mixed irritation, doubt, and the first time. Everything indicated that Michael was telling the truth. But there was one but. This was not enough. We checked the bikers, Green said. Their last address was an abandoned farm in the north of the county. They left 2 weeks ago. But if it was confirmed that they were in the video, he fell silent. It would be loud. Sophia was killed because of me, Michael said dully. I locked up the brother of one of them 6 years ago for drugs, weapons. He got 20. Green nodded. You had a motive, but now we have new evidence. Meanwhile, Rusty was in the shelter, a regular city shelter on the outskirts. Jack Pearson, a hunter, turned him in there, thinking he had done everything he could. But the dog did not want to stay. He whined, growled, and once almost chewed through the metal door of the enclosure. The employees laughed. It was as if this one knew that somewhere out there he had not finished the case. They did not understand how close this was to the truth. A request came into the forensic database. Compare DNA from Sophia Rendell's clothes with the profile of Blake Harris and Charlie Gruber. The answer came in 2 days. Match, 99.8%. 2 samples identified. Michael Carter excluded. A week later, under the cover of night, escorted by armed guards, Michael sat in a black van. They were taking him to the federal building. He was still listed as a prisoner, but it was temporary. In the prosecutor's office, he saw the same footage from the camera. Shadows, voices, ridges, laughter. Everything he had been holding back came out, not in tears, no, in cold anger. Did you arrest them? He asked. 1. The prosecutor replied. Blake Harris was found in a house on the state line. The other one is on the run, but with DNA we will pull him out from under the ground. What about the verdict? Today, the Supreme Court is reviewing the decision. You will go back to prison, but already in the status of a temporary release under protection. You will be acquitted. Michael nodded slowly. I want Rusty back to me. Rusty was sitting by the window in the enclosure and did not take his eyes off the road. When the gates opened and Michael entered the building, the dog did not scream or howl. He simply stood up, like a soldier who saw his commander. Michael came up and knelt down. The dog nuzzled his chest, and for the first time in all this time, Michael allowed himself to close his eyes for a minute and feel nothing, except the fur under his fingers and the warm breath of his friend. But justice is a slow and cruel thing. The bikers hired lawyers, claimed forgery evidence. Pressure. One of the jurors allegedly had a biased opinion. A scandal has begun. The media exploded. Michael's name appeared again in the headlines, not as the name of a killer, but as the name of a man whose life was almost ruined. A detective accused of murder is acquitted after evidence found by his dog. The headline sounded like a movie script, but for Michael it was not a movie. It was a life that had been taken from him and which now had to be returned piece by piece. The final trial lasted 6 hours. The judge reread the materials. The prosecutor filed a motion to overturn the verdict. In the end, everything was said in one phrase. Michael Carter is completely acquitted and released. He went out into the street, where Rusty was standing at the steps of the building, without a leash, without a collar, just standing there. They walked away in silence. Freedom is a strange thing. When you have it, you don't notice it. When it's taken away, you breathe differently. Michael felt it. The first day after his release, when he woke up in a cheap motel room to the rustle of the air conditioner, not to the screams of a guard. He lay on the bed in the clothes they gave him when he got out, and heard Rusty snoring quietly on the floor next to him. He didn't know where to go. He had no friends left. His family had moved to different states, and those who were close had turned away. The phone the police department had given him vibrated. Text from Green. Harris had turned in the other one. Charlie Gruber, extradition tomorrow. Do you want to be there? Michael didn't answer. He didn't want to be there. He wanted it all to be over. The next day, he drove to the courthouse anyway. Not to participate, but to watch. The van with the prisoner drove up under guard. A man with long dirty hair and a crumpled jacket got out. Charlie Gruber, the same one who was laughing in the video, holding Sophia by the hair. Alexei was standing around the corner. No one noticed him, except for one. Charlie. He turned his head and covered his eyes. There. Looks met for a couple of seconds, and in these seconds Alexei saw real fear. The same one that is not given in court. He knew that the man who killed would now live in fear, as he had lived. 2 weeks later, the trial began against Harris and Gruber. The prosecutor called witnesses, DNA experts, video editing specialists. The defense tried to challenge the memory card, claiming that it could have been planted. But the main thing was something else. On one of the tapes found on Harris, investigators found a piece of video where he bragged, "We just buried this piece of trash." Of course, who would listen to him after that? And then another phrase. "And this woman is her own fault. Who did she get involved with?" That was enough. The court sentenced Blake Harris and Charlie Gruber to life imprisonment, without the right of parole. At the end of the trial, the prosecutor, collecting files, looked at Michael. "Do you want to file a civil suit? Compensation, bond charges, years of life. Reputation, there are millions." Michael shook his head. No, why? He looked at Rusty, sitting in the hallway and chewing on an old ball. "I don't need money. I need all of this behind me." Later, he was dragged onto a talk show, an interview for a major TV channel. He refused. He was invited to speak at a conference on the reform of the criminal court. He refused. He was offered to write a book. He refused. He simply got into an old car, bought with the remaining money, threw a bowl, a blanket, a backpack in the trunk, and said to Rusty, "Let's go." The house he moved into was old, creaky, and smelled of what all houses that have been empty for a long time smell of: dampness, old wood, and a forgotten life. But it was clean. The owner, a local carpenter, fixed the roof before leaving, left some firewood, and said goodbye. The silence here is not just in the background. There is silence here, like the person with whom you will have to live. Michael only nodded. He had long since gotten used to living with someone who says nothing. He had bought this house for the amount that the state had paid him as compensation. He had accepted the money reluctantly, as if with dirty hands, but he had chosen the house right away. The outskirts of the state, forests, lakes to the nearest town, 40 minutes by car to the nearest neighbor, 10 minutes on foot. The perfect place to not hear other people's voices. At first, life was strange. Every sound seemed suspicious, every glance in the supermarket aimed. Alexei caught himself locking the doors even during the day and checking the windows before going to bed. But Rusty adapted faster. It was as if he immediately understood. That's it, there is no more danger. Now just live. Every morning began the same way. First silence, then Rusty's footsteps on the floor. Then he would get up, open the door, go out onto the porch, breathe in the cold morning air, and watch the steam rise from his cup of coffee. Rusty would lie down at his feet, resting his muzzle on his paws, and wait quietly. Sometimes he would go out into the forest, not to hunt or to get something, but just to walk. An axe over his shoulder, a thermos in his backpack. He would leave for the whole day, and only return in the evening with brushwood, mushrooms, sometimes with fish. He worked with his hands. This was the only thing that gave him the feeling that he was alive. The neighbors, or rather, the few who lived nearby, did not pry into his soul. One local mechanic named Walt offered him a part-time job, repairing fences, sawing firewood. Michael did not refuse. He wasn't looking for friends, but he had no enemies here either. "Where are you from?" Walt asked once. "From far away?" Michael answered. That was enough. Once a month he went into town, bought food, fishing gear, books. Sometimes he took old newspapers, as if looking for a mention of himself there, but no one had written about him for a long time. The world had forgotten, and that was good. Rusty sat next to him in the car, looking out the window, snorting quietly when bikers drove by. He still remembered the smell. Michael could feel it, but now none of them caused alarm. Those who should have sat down, the rest disappeared. One day, Green came to him without a uniform, without a car, with special signals, in an old pickup truck, holding a bag. He came out, said hello, sat on the porch, and silently opened a beer. "There you are," he said. "Where else would I be?" Green nodded. "Didn't get your license back?" "I don't want to. I'm not in the system anymore." "You were a good cop. It doesn't matter anymore." They were silent for about 10 minutes. Then Green put the bag down on the floor. "Here are the documents. If you ever Want to get reinstated. And here he took a small medallion from his inside pocket, a service badge on the back. Stamped, Carter, 21st District. To the end. It's not official, but you earned it. Michael took it, looked at it, squeezed it in his palm. Thank you. I'll go. Good luck. They didn't see each other again. The years went by. Rusty was getting older. His muzzle was gray, his paws slower. He still went out for walks with Michael, but he no longer ran after the birds. More often he lay under a tree and watched his owner chop wood or fix the roof. He lived another 4 years, and one day, he simply did not wake up. Michael buried him near the house under a large oak tree, put up a wooden cross, did not write anything. He simply sat down next to him and sat until sunset, watching the sunbeams pass through the leaves. He did not cry, did not speak. He only quietly inhaled. Thank you. Now he lived alone. Sometimes the children of the neighbors came to help him bring food. He did not become the one everyone fears, but he was not the one to whom they run for advice. Just a man who lives quietly and honestly after surviving death, betrayal, prison, and living. One evening, when he was reading an old book and drinking tea, a branch hit the window. The wind was getting stronger. Michael went out onto the porch, adjusted the shutter, breathed in the air, and looked at the sky and thought that now everything is in its place. He knew that he would not return to the past. He did not held a grudge. He did not want revenge. All that was gone. All that remained was peace and the memory of her, of him, of the dog that had once saved his life. He sank down on the steps of the porch, turned his face to the wind, and closed his eyes. Silence. The same one the carpenter had talked about, the one with which he could now live.